What I want to do really quickly in this video is I want to talk about 3 different stories in the scriptures and how they all fit together and cohere beautifully together as one continuous narrative, okay? I want to talk about the death, resurrection of Christ, Jonah and the whale, and the shipwreck of St. Paul on the island of Malta in Acts chapter 27 and 28. And I want to talk about how all 3 cohere together in this beautiful reality around the action of God. Okay, now real quick, if you like the contents of this channel, keep in mind a subscription can really help us. We just recently passed 150, or on the way to 200 and even to 1,000. But keep in mind, if you feel so moved, a subscription can certainly really help us out. Okay, with that said, so the death and resurrection of Jesus obviously speaks for itself. And it's well known that the story of Jonah and the whale is a type for the death and resurrection of Jesus, right? Because Jonah goes into the belly of the whale for 3 days and then comes out 3 days later, like Jesus dies on the cross, goes into the tomb for 3 days and then comes out 3 days later, resurrected, okay? Now, with that said, this is even attested to in early Christian art, which are found in certain catacombs and places like this, where the story of Jonah and the whale was explicitly used to talk about the death and resurrection of Jesus. Okay, so that's one type you can draw out there. Now, how would this fit together with the shipwreck of St. Paul on the island of Malta? Now, if you recall, this is where they leave from Caesarea. They're headed west towards Rome, where Paul is to be tried there. And shortly before they hit the Italian peninsula, a terrible storm whips up. They decide to wreck the ship onto the coral reef just off the island of Malta. They go into the water, and then they're delivered onto the land. Okay, and then later St. Paul is bitten by a snake, and they think he's going to die, but he doesn't, and he's healed. Now, how would this all fit together? Well, as you may know, St. Luke is the author of both the Gospel of St. Luke and Acts of the Apostles. It's kind of part 2 of the Gospel of St. Luke. And the climactic story in the Gospel of St. Luke, of course, is the death and resurrection of Christ. Well, in a literary sense, in Acts of the Apostles, the shipwreck of St. Paul takes that literary climactic point that the crucifixion does. And how would this fit together? Well, Jonah and the whale, okay, I know I'm hopping to this as well here, but again, remember, that's a type for Jesus. They go into the water and then are spat out onto the land, okay? In St. Paul goes into the water and is spat out onto the land. Then he's bitten by a snake, right? Now, this is obviously a type for the crucifixion because in Genesis 3, the snake will bite the heel of the son of Adam, but he'll crush his head. Well, St. Paul gets bitten by a snake, and they think the same thing's going to happen to him that happened to Jesus, that he was going to die. But he wasn't. He was delivered because he lives in the resurrection power of Christ. And then they end up taking the gospel to the end of the known world at this time, to the seat of power in the city of Rome. So you can think about it this way. The shipwreck of St. Paul is a reflection of the crucifixion of Christ.